He left her in the hospital, certain the baby wasn't his. 2 years later, he saw a little boy who looked exactly like him. Jackson Harper stood frozen at the entrance of the hospital room, unable to take another step forward. The soft cries of a newborn echoed faintly from inside, but all he could hear were his parents' voices in his head, whispering doubt and certainty with equal weight. His father had told him days ago that Hannah had been seeing someone else behind his back, that the baby she now held couldn't possibly be his. His mother had added just enough emotional pressure to tip him further, reminding him of his career, of the empire he was building, and of how one wrong decision could undo everything. Jackson hadn't wanted to believe it at first, but fear has a way of blinding even the most intelligent man. When Hannah turned her head and saw him standing there, her face lit up, tired, pale, but so full of love and hope that it nearly shattered him. She beckoned him in with her eyes, a silent plea for support, for presence, for belief. But he didn't move. Instead, he stepped back. And then another. Until he turned around and walked out, leaving her holding their newborn alone. As the elevator doors closed in front of him, Jackson felt a weight lift, but it wasn't relief. It was numbness. The kind that creeps in when you've just made a decision you know you'll never be able to take back. Hannah didn't cry when he left. She didn't scream or chase after him. She just looked down at the baby boy in her arms, whose tiny features already showed hints of the man she loved, and now hated. Her heart didn't just break, it unraveled slowly, like a thread pulled loose until all that remained was exhaustion and disbelief. She whispered soft words to the infant, promised him she would protect him, that he was wanted, even if his father refused to see it. In the days that followed, Jackson buried himself in work. He signed deals, held press conferences, and smiled through photo shoots. The tabloids praised his focus, his clarity, his single-minded ambition. No one knew what he had left behind to maintain that image. No one asked. And he never offered. When people brought up Hannah, he dismissed her with a blank look, pretending it had been nothing more than a short-lived mistake. Meanwhile, Hannah moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city. She juggled sleepless nights and endless diapers with freelance work and overdue bills. She grew quiet, inward, and strong in ways she had never imagined she would need to be. Every time she looked into her son's eyes, blue like his father's, she felt a storm of conflicting emotions. She loved him more than life itself. But forgiving Jackson? That was something she couldn't even imagine. Her body healed. Her spirit didn't. She never told Jackson about the long nights at the emergency room, about the first fever, or the first laugh. She never sent photos or texts. If he wanted out, then he would stay out. But deep down, somewhere beneath the anger and the fatigue, a small part of her still waited. Not for him to come back, but for him to realize what he had left. She didn't need him to fix what he'd broken. She just wanted him to see the truth. And the truth, she knew, was growing stronger every single day in the arms of a boy who looked more like his father with each passing hour. 2 years passed, marked not by calendar pages but by sleepless nights, scraped knees, and quiet victories. Hannah's life had reshaped itself around her son, Liam, who had grown from a fragile newborn into a vibrant, curious toddler with a shock of blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that mirrored the very man she had spent so long trying to forget. Each day she woke up before the sun, often to the sound of tiny feet padding into her room, and each night she collapsed into bed after juggling work, parenting, and the heavy silence that settled in once Liam was asleep. Money was always tight. The part-time paralegal work she'd taken after her maternity leave had ended was barely enough to keep them afloat. She supplemented her income with freelance legal research projects she completed late at night, long after Liam was in bed. Her friends had slowly faded away, some unsure of what to say, others too wrapped up in their own lives to notice hers had changed completely. Her parents helped when they could, but they lived in another state and had their own struggles to manage. Hannah didn't talk about Jackson, not to her friends, not to her family, and certainly not to Liam, who was still too young to ask where his father was or why he never came around. But she thought about him more than she wanted to admit. Every time Liam smiled just so, or said something with the same cadence Jackson once used, she felt a quiet ache in her chest. She didn't cry anymore. That part of her had dried up in the first few months after Jackson left. Now she simply carried the loss with her, folded neatly into her days like the small scar on her stomach, a reminder that something had been taken from her. There were moments when the bitterness threatened to swallow her. Especially when she remembered how Jackson had left so easily, with no explanation, no goodbye. He hadn't even held Liam. He had made his decision based on lies told by people who were supposed to protect him. And what hurt the most was that he hadn't questioned them. Not once. He had believed she was capable of betrayal. He had believed their child wasn't his. And he had walked away without looking back. But Hannah didn't let that bitterness show. She couldn't afford to. She had a little boy to raise, and Liam needed joy, not shadows. So she learned to smile again, for him. She took him to the park every weekend, even when she was exhausted. She read him the same bedtime story 6 nights in a row because it made him laugh. She taught him how to say please and thank you, how to tie his shoes, how to be kind. Every milestone he reached, she celebrated like it was the 4th of July. Still, there were hard days when Liam got sick and she had no one to lean on, days when she wondered if she'd ever trust anyone again. Sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet and her defenses were down, she found herself imagining what might have happened if Jackson had stayed. If he had held his son that day. If he had looked past the lies. But she always pushed those thoughts away. She had stopped believing in second chances. One gray afternoon, she took Liam to the city park after work. He loved the swings, and she loved watching him soar, his tiny sneakers kicking the sky. She sat on the bench with a thermos of lukewarm coffee and a book she didn't plan to read. Liam's laughter filled the air. Then, across the field, she saw him. Jackson. He wasn't dressed like a businessman that day. No suit, no tie, just dark jeans and a wool coat. He looked older, slightly more tired, but unmistakably the same man she had once loved. Their eyes met, and in that split second, she saw something flash across his face, shock, disbelief, maybe even recognition. He stared at Liam, who had just hopped off the swing and was now running toward her with a wide grin. Jackson didn't move. He just stood there, frozen, as if his world had just tilted. Hannah turned away before Liam reached her, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the wind. She picked up her son and whispered, "It's time to go, sweetheart," trying to keep her voice steady. That night, as she tucked Liam into bed, she couldn't stop shaking. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if Jackson had really seen what she feared, and hoped, he had. But for the first time in 2 years, something had cracked in the wall she had built around herself. And it terrified her. Because if he had seen Liam clearly, if he knew, then everything might change. And after surviving so long on her own, Hannah wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of earthquake. Jackson couldn't sleep that night. Not after what he had seen in the park. That boy, the way he ran, the way he laughed, the exact shade of his blonde hair, the same piercing blue eyes that stared back at Jackson every morning in the mirror. It had been a split second, but in that moment, something inside him shifted violently. He had always believed he had done the right thing, or at least the necessary thing. His parents had been so sure. The timing didn't add up, they had said. Hannah had been distant. She had smiled at other men. The seed of doubt had been planted, and he had watered it with fear and self-preservation. But seeing that child, so unmistakably his, made all those excuses crumble like dry leaves. He spent hours pacing his apartment, ignoring calls and canceling meetings. His assistant was baffled, unsure why the usually composed and sharp CEO had suddenly gone off the grid. Jackson didn't offer an explanation because he didn't have one. All he had were questions. What had he done? How had he allowed himself to believe such a lie? And most of all, what kind of man leaves his own child without even asking for the truth? By morning, the exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was soul deep. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at an untouched cup of coffee, thinking about the day he walked out of that hospital room. The image came back clearly, Hannah holding their newborn, her eyes full of quiet hope, and him walking away without a single word. He hadn't even looked at the baby. The shame was sudden and blinding. He didn't deserve forgiveness. But he knew, with absolute certainty, that he needed to find them. He needed to see the boy again. He needed to speak to Hannah, even if she slammed the door in his face. It took him 2 days to track her down. She had moved, changed jobs, cut off most mutual contacts. But Jackson had resources, and with each new piece of information, his guilt only deepened. She had lived alone, raised their son with no help, not even child support, because she had never asked. She hadn't tried to punish him, hadn't exposed him in the media, hadn't demanded a thing. She had simply disappeared and endured. When he found the address, he sat in his car for almost an hour, watching the building from a distance. He saw her walk out with Liam, holding his tiny hand as they crossed the street. Liam was chattering excitedly, pointing at things only he could understand, and Hannah smiled at him with a tired tenderness that pierced Jackson's heart. He didn't approach them that day. He couldn't. He wasn't ready, and they didn't deserve to be ambushed. But he started coming back. Every day for a week, he watched from afar. Not because he wanted to invade their privacy, but because he needed to see who they had become without him. Liam was full of life, curious, joyful, fearless. And Hannah, she was no longer the soft-spoken girl he remembered. She was fierce now, focused, and radiant in a way that came not from ease but from survival. Jackson began to realize that by leaving her, he hadn't just missed out on his son's life, he had missed the chance to grow beside a woman who had become something extraordinary. The following week, he finally gathered the courage to speak to her. He waited outside Liam's daycare, timing it carefully. When Hannah emerged with Liam bouncing alongside her, he stepped out of the car slowly and approached. Her eyes locked onto his instantly, and her entire body stiffened. She pulled Liam gently behind her, protectively, like a reflex, and Jackson stopped several feet away, not wanting to cause more damage than he already had. "Hannah," he said, his voice dry from nerves. "Please don't walk away. I need to talk." She looked at him, eyes hard but unreadable. "There's nothing to talk about." "There is," he said quietly. "I saw him. I know. And I didn't know." She exhaled sharply, glancing down at Liam, who was tugging at her coat, unaware of the tension. "That's the problem, Jackson. You didn't want to know." He swallowed, unable to deny it. "I was wrong. They lied to me. My parents." "I don't care what they told you," she interrupted, her voice calm but shaking. "You left. You didn't ask. You didn't even hold him." The silence that followed was heavy. Jackson nodded slowly. "I know. I've lived with that every day since I saw him. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I had to come. I had to say it to your face. I'm sorry, Hannah. I was weak. I was scared. And I believed the wrong people. But he looks just like me. I saw it. I know he's mine." She looked away, eyes glassy, and knelt beside Liam, brushing a leaf from his coat. When she stood again, she didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally, "I don't know what you want from us. But if you're going to be here, really here, you don't get to disappear again." "I won't," he said quickly, too quickly. "You don't get to say that yet," she replied. "We'll see." And with that, she took Liam's hand and walked away, leaving Jackson standing in the chill of the evening, shaken but somehow lighter than he had felt in years. It wasn't hope yet. But it wasn't the end either. The days following their first conversation were fragile, suspended somewhere between uncertainty and quiet possibility. Jackson didn't press. He didn't call or show up unannounced. Instead, he waited, unsure whether he was respecting her space or simply too afraid to risk rejection again. He went back to his routines, but nothing felt the same. The boardroom lost its thrill. The applause at shareholder meetings sounded hollow. Numbers on screens meant little when he couldn't stop thinking about a boy with his smile and a woman who had once trusted him enough to carry their child alone. Hannah, meanwhile, couldn't stop replaying their encounter. She was angry, furious, even, but underneath the anger, there was a strange trembling, not of fear, but of something she didn't want to name yet. Jackson had looked lost, not rehearsed or manipulative. And most disorienting of all, Liam had liked him. He hadn't cried or hidden behind her. He had watched Jackson with open, innocent curiosity, and it haunted her. She wasn't ready to forgive him. She wasn't sure she ever would be. But she also couldn't deny the ache of watching her son unknowingly meet his father for the first time and not recognizing what he'd missed. The following weekend, Hannah sent a short message. It wasn't sentimental. It was careful and clear. If you still want to see him, come to the park at 11 on Saturday. Just you. Jackson stared at the screen for a long time before responding with a simple, "I'll be there." That Saturday, he arrived early. He wore jeans and a gray sweater, trying not to look like a corporate machine. He hadn't known what to bring, so he carried a small toy car Liam might like and a book tucked under his arm, something his mother used to read to him when he was small. When Hannah arrived with Liam bundled in a bright yellow jacket, the boy immediately ran toward the playground. Jackson didn't move, unsure if he was supposed to follow. Hannah stood beside him, arms crossed, not looking at him directly. "Thank you for coming," he said carefully. She nodded, eyes still tracking Liam. "I don't know what this is yet. I just thought, he should have the option to know you. That's it." "I don't want to confuse him," Jackson said. "I just want to be around. Even if it's just as a friend right now." "He doesn't need a friend. He needs a father. Someone who shows up and stays. I want to be that." "I do." "Then don't say it," she replied. "Show it." Liam ran up just then, sand on his hands and a wide grin on his face. He looked at Jackson and pointed at the swings. "Push me." It was such a simple request, but it landed like a stone in Jackson's chest. He smiled softly and nodded. "Yeah, buddy. Let's go." They walked to the swing set together. Jackson gently helped Liam into the seat and began to push, not too hard, listening as the boy squealed with laughter. Hannah watched from the bench, arms still wrapped around herself, unsure what to feel. Part of her wanted to cry. Another part wanted to get up and walk away. But mostly, she just sat still, because for the first time since Liam was born, she wasn't doing this alone. Over the next few weeks, these visits became a pattern. Jackson came to the park every Saturday. He brought small things, snacks, toys, books, but more importantly, he brought time. He learned how to talk to Liam, how to match his rhythm, how to answer his endless questions. He never rushed. He never made promises he couldn't keep. And slowly, Hannah began to let her guard down, inch by inch. One afternoon, when Liam had fallen asleep in her lap under the sun, she looked at Jackson and asked, "Why didn't you question it? Why was it so easy to believe them?" He didn't dodge it. "Because I was scared. I was selfish. And I didn't want to lose everything I thought I'd worked for. But I lost more than I ever imagined. I see that now." Hannah stared down at her son's face. "He's amazing, you know. You missed so much." "I know," he said quietly. "But if there's still time to learn who he is, even a little, I'll take it." She didn't answer. She just kept holding her son, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to protect him alone. And that, even if she wouldn't say it yet, mattered more than anything. The 5th month of their new rhythm brought a fragile calm, like the first few clear days after a storm. Jackson was no longer a stranger in Liam's life. He still wasn't called Dad, and he never asked to be. But when Liam fell and scraped his knee one afternoon and instinctively reached for Jackson before anyone else, Hannah felt something shift. She had been sitting just a few steps away, fully present, and yet her son had chosen the man who once left before he ever held him. That moment stirred something in her that she didn't want to examine too closely, because if she did, she'd have to acknowledge that Jackson was becoming a real part of their world. And it scared her. Not because she didn't want it, but because she did. And wanting meant risking everything all over again. Jackson felt the change too. He began to anticipate Liam's needs, noticing small things, when he got overwhelmed by noise, when he needed time to wake up before being spoken to, which stories made him giggle. He asked Hannah questions, not just to be involved, but to understand. He didn't try to overstep. He didn't challenge her authority. If anything, he respected it so deeply that sometimes it caught her off guard. And every time she expected him to falter or disappear, he didn't. One day, after a long afternoon at the Children's Museum, Liam fell asleep in the back seat of Jackson's car. They had all gone together. Hannah had insisted on driving separately at first, but Jackson had offered to pick them up so Liam wouldn't have to be shuffled between vehicles. She had reluctantly agreed. After parking outside her apartment, they sat in silence for a while, neither wanting to wake the boy. "Do you ever think," Jackson said softly, not looking at her, "about how different everything could have been if I'd just stayed that night?" Hannah didn't answer right away. She traced a circle on the condensation forming on the window. "Sometimes. But mostly I try not to. What good would it do?" "I think about it all the time," he admitted. "About how I let fear make a decision that cost me everything." Hannah turned slightly in her seat. "You're here now. And he's lucky. But I can't go back and erase those years. I can't unfeel what I went through." "I'm not asking you to," Jackson said. "I'm not here for you to forget. I just want to be worthy of being part of what comes next." Hannah sighed and looked back at her son. "He's everything to me. You hurt both of us, even if he doesn't know it yet." "I know," Jackson said. "I live with it every day. But I'll keep showing up, even when it's hard, even if I don't get everything I want. Because he deserves a father, and you deserve peace." That night, after she carried Liam inside and tucked him into bed, Hannah sat on the couch and let herself cry for the first time in months. Not because she was broken, but because part of her, just a sliver, was beginning to hope again. And that kind of hope is the most terrifying kind of all. As the weeks passed, Jackson began helping in more practical ways. He volunteered to take Liam to his speech therapy sessions once a week, sat through parent-child playgroups, even started cooking Sunday breakfast when they invited him inside. It began with small things, Hannah asking him to grab milk from the store while she changed Liam, or passing him the baby wipes without a word. But over time, those small things grew into habits, and the space he occupied in their lives slowly became less temporary. Liam noticed too. He didn't call Jackson by name anymore, he called him Jay, a nickname born from toddler mispronunciation and carried with affection. Jackson didn't correct it. He wore it like a badge. And then one night, as Liam fell asleep on Jackson's chest during a movie, Hannah looked over and realized her fear had been replaced by something else. She couldn't name it yet. But she no longer braced for him to disappear. She no longer wondered if he was playing a role. He wasn't perfect, but he was real. And real was more than she had thought she'd ever get. It still wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. But it was something close. It was the beginning of a life neither of them had planned for, but one both of them were now brave enough to reach for. Autumn settled gently over the city, wrapping the streets in warm gold and rust-colored leaves. The air turned crisp, and Liam began insisting on wearing his favorite little hat with the bare ears, even indoors. It had been nearly 6 months since Jackson re-entered their lives, and while no one had labeled what they had, the routine they'd created was undeniably a shared one. Jackson was there almost every day, picking Liam up from daycare when Hannah had late meetings, reading bedtime stories, attending preschool open houses, and even helping put together a wobbly IKEA bookshelf that had sat half-assembled in Hannah's hallway for nearly a year. He had become a fixture in their home, not as a guest, but something steadier. Yet with the comfort of that routine came complexity. Hannah found herself questioning her own boundaries. Jackson wasn't the same man who had left her in a hospital bed. He was softer now, more thoughtful. He asked before doing anything, and he listened when she spoke. He never interrupted, never defended the version of the past that made him feel better. He owned his mistakes in a way that felt rare and unpolished. And that made it all the more difficult for Hannah to keep him at arm's length. One Thursday evening, after a long workday, Hannah came home to find Jackson and Liam in the kitchen. They were making pancakes for dinner, batter everywhere, flour on the counters, Liam's face streaked with maple syrup and pride. It was chaotic, but it was beautiful. Jackson looked up, a little sheepish, and said, "We got hungry, and someone wanted to help." Hannah didn't scold them. She just laughed, a soft sound that surprised all three of them. That night, after Liam was in bed, she poured 2 cups of tea and sat across from Jackson at the kitchen table. They talked about nothing for a while, about her annoying coworker, about a weird ad Jackson saw on the subway, about what Liam had learned at preschool that week. But as the conversation wound down, Jackson's gaze grew serious. "Do you ever think about what this is?" he asked quietly, not looking directly at her. She stirred her tea slowly. "All the time. I just don't know how to define it yet." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But I know it's not pretend. I know I care about him. And I care about you." "That never really stopped, Hannah." She looked at him then, and her heart did that thing it used to do back when they were younger, when love felt like an open road instead of a collapsed bridge. She wanted to believe him, but part of her was still protecting the version of herself that had been abandoned. "I don't trust easily anymore," she said after a pause. "And I can't promise I'll be able to give you what you're hoping for." "I'm not asking you to promise anything," he said. "Just keep letting me be here. Let me earn it, if I can." And she nodded, because that felt safe. Because it was honest. In the weeks that followed, their dynamic shifted in small but noticeable ways. Hannah started inviting him to stay for dinner without prompting. Jackson brought over Liam's favorite muffins on Monday mornings before work. One Friday, he fell asleep on the couch while reading to Liam, and Hannah covered him with a blanket instead of waking him. The moments were simple, but they added up. They began to share the weight of parenting in ways Hannah hadn't realized she was missing. When Liam got sick with a nasty flu, Jackson stayed up with her through the night, holding a bowl, wiping his son's forehead, running to the pharmacy in the rain without complaint. He didn't just show up, he stayed, through the messy, the exhausting, the real. And Hannah, watching him curled at the edge of her couch at dawn, realized he wasn't doing it out of guilt anymore. He was doing it because he loved their son. Because he loved her. Still, she didn't say those words out loud. Not yet. But the wall between them had begun to crumble, and for the first time in years, she let herself wonder what it might be like if they weren't just co-parents. If they were something more. She wasn't ready to name it. But she didn't turn away from it either. Not anymore. By the time winter arrived, snow blanketing the city in soft silence, their lives had settled into a quiet rhythm that felt almost like family. Jackson had grown into his role with a naturalness that surprised even him. Liam began to expect him, not with hesitation but with delight, small arms reaching up for hugs, proud declarations like "Jay's picking me up today," echoing through preschool hallways. He still didn't call him Dad, and Jackson never asked him to. The name didn't matter. The connection did. For Hannah, the slow transformation was harder to process. She was used to doing things alone. She had survived the sleepless nights, the terrifying illnesses, the empty holidays, all without anyone to lean on. And now here he was, no longer a shadow from her past, but a real man who showed up in ways that were no longer performative. He was part of the routine. And part of her. One evening, just before Christmas, they attended Liam's preschool holiday concert. It was the kind of chaotic event only parents and small children could love: paper snowflakes taped to walls, glitter everywhere, teachers trying to keep 3-year-olds in line while they sang off-key carols. Liam stood proudly in the front row, his reindeer antlers slightly crooked, and Jackson sat beside Hannah, filming the whole thing with a shaky hand and misty eyes. Hannah glanced over at him once, catching the rawness in his expression. That, more than any apology he had ever spoken, told her just how much he'd changed. After the concert, they bundled Liam up and walked to a nearby diner for hot chocolate. Liam chattered about his songs, his classmates, how he was the loudest reindeer, and how Jay had to see him sing again at home. Hannah smiled through it all, sipping her cocoa, occasionally brushing snow from Liam's eyelashes. It was simple. It was ordinary. And that scared her more than anything. Because simplicity was the one thing she'd never had with Jackson before. Later that night, when Liam was asleep in the car seat, Jackson didn't start the engine right away. They sat in silence, the windows fogged slightly from their breath. "I never thought I'd get to have this," he said, not looking at her. "This?" Hannah asked, her voice quiet. He nodded. "Not just being a dad. Being with you too. You've let me in, even when I didn't deserve it." "You didn't," she said honestly. "But you stayed long enough to earn your way back." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped package. "I was going to wait until Christmas, but I think maybe it's time." Hannah looked at it warily. "What is it?" "It's not what you think. It's not a ring or some dramatic gesture. I know we're not there yet. But I wanted to give you this." She unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a simple photo frame. Inside was a candid shot of Liam on Jackson's shoulders from the park, laughing so hard his face was flushed. On the bottom, engraved into the silver, were the words, "The moment I knew I'd never leave again." Hannah stared at the photo for a long time, her throat tight. "You've changed," she whispered. "I had to," he said. "But more than that, I wanted to." They didn't kiss that night. There were no grand declarations. Just a long, quiet drive back to her apartment. When they got there, Jackson carried Liam upstairs, tucked him into bed without waking him, and turned to go. But at the door, Hannah stopped him. "Do you want to stay for dinner tomorrow?" she asked. "It's just spaghetti, but it's something." Jackson smiled, his heart swelling in a way he hadn't felt in years. "I'd like that." And so it continued, slowly, with no rush, no pressure, no guarantees. Just two people finding their way back to something that had been broken, something that still bore scars, but was healing in a way that neither of them had dared to hope for. For the first time, Hannah stopped bracing for the worst. She allowed herself to believe in what was growing between them. And Jackson, humbled by everything he had once taken for granted, finally understood the depth of what it meant to be part of a family. Not just to love, but to stay. Spring arrived in subtle shifts. The snow melted into soft puddles along the sidewalks, Liam's winter boots were replaced with sneakers, and Hannah found herself opening windows again just to let in the fresh air. It had been almost a full year since Jackson had reappeared in their lives, and the change in all three of them was undeniable. Liam was thriving, confident, happy, and bright. He knew both of his parents now, not just one, and he never questioned that they were both his. He didn't understand the past, and Hannah hoped he never would, not the loneliness, not the betrayal, not the cold silence that once sat between them. All he knew now was warmth. For Hannah, there were still moments of hesitation. Her wounds hadn't disappeared, they had just scarred over in quiet, invisible ways. But Jackson had continued to earn back every ounce of trust. He never missed a school event, never forgot a pickup time, never crossed the invisible boundaries she had drawn in the beginning. Over time, she stopped noticing those boundaries because he stopped needing reminders. He understood her rhythm, her silence, her glances, the weight behind a single look. He knew when to lean in and when to give her space. And that, more than anything, had healed her. One evening, they sat on the front steps of Hannah's apartment, watching Liam blow bubbles across the yard. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over everything. The light made Jackson's hair appear even blonder, and his eyes softer than she remembered from years ago. Liam laughed and chased the bubbles with his whole body, arms stretched wide like he was trying to catch the entire sky. Hannah smiled, her shoulders relaxed. There had been so much tension between them once, now there was only this quiet contentment. Jackson leaned back on his hands and looked at her carefully. "You know, I used to think my whole life was about achievement. The next big deal, the next title, the next headline. But none of that ever felt like this." Hannah turned to him, her expression open. "Like what?" "Like home," he said simply. "Not a place, but people. You and Liam, you are home." She didn't speak right away. That word, home, meant something different to her. It wasn't soft rugs and warm meals. It was survival. It was long nights alone with a baby and no answers. But she understood what he meant. Because lately, she'd begun to feel the same. The three of them, imperfect, patched together, they had built something strong. Not because it had been easy, but because it had been hard, and they stayed anyway. "I never thought I'd say this," she said, her voice low, "but I'm glad you came back." Jackson looked down, his throat tightening. "I didn't know if I'd ever deserve to hear that." "You don't," she said, but with a smile that softened the words. "But you're here. And that's more than I ever thought I'd get." Liam came running toward them then, collapsing into Hannah's lap in a swirl of giggles and grass-stained knees. Jackson reached over and smoothed his hair back. Liam leaned into the touch without hesitation. It was natural now, unquestioned. Hannah watched the moment, committing it to memory. There had been so many nights she had rocked this boy to sleep, wondering if he'd ever know his father. And now here he was, tangled between the two of them, safe. Weeks later, on a warm April afternoon, Jackson asked if they could go somewhere special, just the three of them. He didn't say why. He just told them to dress comfortably. They drove out of the city, past open fields and winding roads, until they reached a quiet house with a wraparound porch. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't grand. But it was beautiful, with enough space for a child to run and enough quiet for Hannah to breathe. "This was my grandmother's house," Jackson said as they stepped out of the car. "She left it to me when she passed, and I never did anything with it. I didn't know what it was for. Until now." Liam ran through the tall grass like it was his private kingdom. Hannah walked the perimeter slowly, taking it all in, the old swing set, the ivy creeping up the porch, the steady breeze. Jackson joined her after a moment. "I'm not asking for anything," he said, his voice careful. "But I wanted to show you this. Because I want to build a life. Not just moments, not just weekends. I want the whole thing." Hannah looked at the house again, then at him. There was no fear in her this time. No suspicion. Just the quiet certainty that came from time, consistency, and love that had been tested and proven real. "I don't know what the future looks like," she said. "But I'm not afraid of it anymore." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. And in that small moment, under the open sky, with their son's laughter echoing from the trees, what once had broken between them was whole again. Not perfect, not untouched, but whole. And that was enough to begin forever. The ending of this story is powerful because it doesn't rely on dramatic twists or over-the-top redemption. Instead, it leans into something far more meaningful, the quiet rebuilding of trust. Jackson doesn't magically fix everything, he learns to show up, to listen, and to take responsibility. And Hannah, despite everything, allows herself to heal at her own pace, without rushing forgiveness. That feels honest. What makes the ending beautiful is that it's not about returning to who they were before, it's about becoming something new. The boy at the center of it all, Liam, is the thread that ties them together, not just biologically but emotionally. Through him, they both grow into the kind of people they probably never would have become on their own. It's a happy ending, but not an easy one. And that's why it feels earned.